Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March edition of the StackRox community meeting. I am co-chair Michael Foster, joined by my other co-chair Matthias Mettinger. And today we're going to talk bug fixes, a little bit of the 4.0 release, just planning for next month. And then we want to address a bunch of questions in Slack because we can't get to them all. So again, if you're ever in the channel or in Slack, you can post them there. We get to them when we can. Busy people, though. But again, you can always come to the meetings if you're looking for one-on-one information. With that being said, Matthias, you want to take it away on some of the updates, fixes, pre 4.0 ship?
Yeah, so actually it's exciting times because right now we are preparing for the big release, which is 4.0. But also we've been in the process of actually shipping 3 patches. So first of all, if you experience a problem that you are missing runtime events or the network graph doesn't look like it should, please have a look at your version because likely you might need to update to the latest patch version because that is the main reason why we needed to patch. So quick status on that, 372, the patch is shipped. So 372.4 is the version you want to be on. 373.3 shipped as well. And for 374, so the current latest release, we are in progress of actually finishing the release for this patch. The patch is planned for next week if all goes well. So be mindful, next week is most likely another patch coming for the latest version. With that said, let's talk maybe about things that are a little bit more exciting, which is the 4.0 release. So we actually decided to bump the major version because 4.0, for the people that haven't heard about it, is actually a major change. We are switching the database that is behind the scenes to Postgres. So it will be a little bit more enterprise, a little bit more stable if all goes well, and performance should also see some improvements depending on the use case. And for that, we actually wanted to open the floor because it is going to be a rather big migration and not like a nice and easy as usual upgrade, but instead there will be a little bit more involved. So if you folks have any questions about anything regarding storage, the upgrade path, obviously we're going to give you examples and documentation how that works. But also, if you have any questions or any scenarios that you would like to address, feel free to either open an issue on GitHub or let us know in the Slack, because that will be most likely a big part of our next meetings. So basically, we want to collect all of this and then address this as you can see the next meeting as a 4.0 preparation and maybe how to do things the right way, hopefully. Yes. So if you have anything, please feel free to let us know. The 4.0 release, for everyone interested, is scheduled for late April. So we will most likely have a concrete date in the next community meeting, but for now, rough pointer for you, bigger changes coming late April this year. And with that, I'll hand it off to Foster with more questions that we had in the meantime, right?
Yeah, it's spot on. Yeah, so like I said, the Slack channel is always busy, has a lot of questions, can't get to them all. And I thought it'd just be nice to try to corral the monthly ones in here in case they weren't addressed or weren't addressed succinctly. Again, like Matthias said, any 4.0 questions, post in the Slack. I know the PMs really want to see feedback about their use cases because there are, let's say, smaller use cases that don't necessarily hit their ears. Sometimes it's always customer or let's say a little bias. So it's nice to hear some of the open source examples. Really appreciate it. And I'll do a little CTA as well in the Slack channel for you. Some questions that came in. So with the 4.0 and 4.74 release, 4.74 has some of those features that are going to ship with 4.0, like the new network graph, the collections feature for policy management that you need Postgres to be able to use. So David asks, is there a way to use externally managed Postgres database instead of the built-in one on the chart? And Matthias, I think the answer is not currently, no.
So we planned and built this feature in a way that you will be able to use an external database for it, or at least if all goes well. That's actually not on my team, so I'm not entirely aware. But the thing is, I think the Helm charts currently don't support providing an external database. But that we as far as I'm aware, we plan to make it customizable so that you can bring your own database. But that might take a little bit longer until we get to that.
All right, I also marked it for myself to follow up. Brandon has a question. Has anyone installed the Helm charts using a declarative approach? We're storing Helm charts in a Git repo, using a tool Argo CD to load them into a cluster. Kind of curious if everybody has any examples of this. I was toying with maybe creating a community repo where people could upload examples. So I might post in the chat, see how much interest there is, because obviously somebody has to manage that and the access alone, and it's a whole work thing. But I do know that there are examples where people take the Helm values file specifically, and they have multiple different values files, but the underlying Helm chart remains the same, and you just basically apply, and that's how you can manage updates as code. I've seen that happen. I know there's some moving parts to that. You really kind of have to know the applications you're working with to do that effectively. I don't know of any concrete examples in there. So if anybody in the Slack channel has done it, I know Brandon would definitely like to see it. And I will follow up to see if doing examples like that is worthwhile. I think having a repo of customer and say user examples would be interesting. It's just nice to get all that in one place. Chaminda says, I want to add synthetic checks to monitor a StackRox instance. I've only seen admin/user having username and password authentication. Matthias, you said anytime you're doing checks like this, you recommend using tokens and contacting the API instead of doing any sort of login of that sort.
Yeah, so generally, if you want to automate things around StackRox or ACS, usually I would recommend, if you can, use the API, and the API is token based. So there is no username, password things that you need to take care of, but instead you can just create tokens. These are rather finely grained, so you don't need to use an admin token for that. We also have callbacks. So StackRox can also be configured to make use of callbacks. So for specific violations or alerts, you can also have an external URL called, for example. So this is also an integration that could be used for this purpose. Obviously, that very much depends on the purpose. At least for Chaminda, I'm not aware of I'm not familiar with the tool that they're trying to use. So obviously, I cannot really talk a lot about that. But in general, API token based, general recommendation, and also maybe the callbacks are something that is of use to people.
Yeah, interesting. Synthetic checks with StackRox is kind of a cool use case. So, Chaminda, if you get that all set up, I'm kind of curious to hear more. Following up, so Jesse has some Docker shim updates. EKS 1.24 no longer supports Docker shim, so applications cannot mount docker.sock. Now, the collector does mount that in ACS, so we're reviewing options moving forward. I think a lot of it had to do with some compliance checks, some old Docker CIS benchmark checking as well, probably. So we're reviewing that. We'll have an update for you next month, hopefully. And then the last thing Colton said, a pod priority update. So being able to set the pod priority in the Helm chart is something that Colton's looking for, so that StackRox collector sensor doesn't get evicted in the case of a high memory usage. I was talking with Matthias earlier. One of the issues is that if you set it on the StackRox level, it gets set cluster wide. So there's a whole, let's say, thought behind, do you leave it as default complete 0 and then let somebody fill it in? Do you recommend that it's 10,000, but then people have to know the effect in their cluster? It's something that we need to collect a little bit more information on. So if anybody wants to weigh in on the pod prior update, I put the link to the GitHub issue there. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, thanks again for Colton for bringing that up. That is, we definitely do not want the central getting evicted for, let's say, less favorable workloads. But yeah, and again, we have to think about if we change the Helm chart, there's the operator, there's the static YAMLs, and how does that affect all of the manifests downstream? So, but definitely a feature that we want to look into. I think that wraps up all the Slack issues. Again, if anybody's watching, throw us questions in the Slack. We'll always review them every month. Matthias, did I miss anything there?
Not really. So I think the only comment I would have is we actually have a running. So this is not only a GitHub issue with the pod priority updates, it is actually a pull request. So from another community member, which is Rebecca JR, I think, on Slack. So they actually already made a proposal how we could do this in Helm charts. But I guess before I am happy to merge that would need a rather big round of testing, because we are running more, I mean, OpenShift first, of course, but we are running Kubernetes agnostic. So we would need to make sure that this works as intended on all platforms. And also I need to check with our PAMs a little bit to actually see whether this use case works out for us, and this is if that's the way how we want to do things, because our operator is also based on these very Helm charts. So every change we do also propagates to the Helm-based operator, which means we need to take a little bit of care when we update Helm charts.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I see we have Oscar and Neil in the chat. Anything you want to add? Anything you're looking forward to 4.0? I'll take silence as you're just patiently awaiting the release, but it's nice to see you all in the meeting. Yeah, other than that, I think that's all we have for today. We'll see you guys in the Slack channel. The next meeting is April 11th. So April 11th, 12 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central savings times. Yeah, I just went through daylight savings times. I woke up extremely groggy on Sunday. Like, what's going on? Completely forgot. So, 30 years in life, still forget. But awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Matthias, any final thoughts before we head out?
I don't think so, except as usual, folks, we're in Slack, we're there, we're on GitHub. So feel free to open a GitHub issue or ping us on Slack. So basically, Foster and I hang out there, always there to help. And I guess with that, that's it from me.
Signing off. See you next month. And thanks for joining. Take care.